Well, hey everyone, welcome. Glad you're here. Glad to have you with us. We're just going to spend a little time with Sherry Falkenheimer. She is the Director of Medical Education International with CMDA. She is a professor of bioethics and Trinity International University in Deerfield, Illinois. And so our hope, our dream, our desire is that somehow that the Lord would use the conversation today to stir something in you so that you can better live the mission that God has put in front of you. And so to leverage your one and only life and the skills and the talents you've been given for His kingdom and for His glory. And so to that end, just Sherry would love to introduce them to you. So why don't you tell us a little bit, tell us about who you are. Give us a little glimpse of what CMDA is so that we get a little picture of where we're at.
Okay, I grew up in northern New York and really understood that Jesus had died for my sins when I was in college, and that was just such a great blessing. For some reason, I thought I was going to die young, and I had no assurance of what would happen at the end, and it was such a blessing. And that was through a campus Christian group, and those groups do a great job. And then I went to the Urbana Student Mission Conference my senior year, and I learned so much about missions and dedicated my life to being involved in whatever way the Lord called me, preferably cross-culturally. And I am a physician. I had my medical school paid for by the Air Force, so I actually served in the Air Force for almost 27 years. I looked at each point whether I should get out and go to missions, but actually halfway through I went to a missions conference, and no missionary there encouraged me to get out if I could be retired and have a pension and be self-supporting in 10 more years. So I did that, and then after I was retired a short time, I found out that Christian Medical and Dental Association was looking for someone to oversee its mission arm, Medical Education International, which is the group that sends short-term teams of healthcare professionals to teach colleagues in low and middle income countries. We try to organize the team for whatever topic they want and recruit appropriate people. And one of our big goals, of course, is to reach out to our colleagues and have opportunities to show our faith with them. We work where there are a lot of major world religions that aren't very faith-friendly, and we can't just give out tracts or give the gospel. So we build relationships and ask the Lord to use us. Christian Medical and Dental Association started over 90 years ago at Northwestern Medical School, and it has on almost every medical, dental, osteopathic campus and some other campuses for physical therapists and occupational therapists, for example. We have campus Christian fellowships, kind of like you would have in college with Crew or in a varsity or those groups. And that's about half of our membership. But we also have a lot of graduate physicians that do many different things. We have over 40 different ministries, but missions has always been at the heart of what we do. And we do have a group that does typical short-term clinical teams like most people are aware of. We have a group that helps people going long-term, prepare and have additional training on the field. And then the group I oversee provides these teaching teams.
Wow. So if I have a list of questions I'm excited to answer. I'm going to try as best I can to get some questions that maybe you most naturally have. And here's one of the things I love, Sherry, about people like you is you have more wisdom inside of you than most of us. You've forgotten more than we know. So
I don't know about that.
So here's what a couple things. If you had to just put a pin in, if I just had to articulate it as best I can, I am probably the most passionate about what?
Reaching colleagues in other countries and international students here, I would say.
Yeah, love that. Well, today, one of the things we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about, things like, tell me, some people say, okay, to be in missions, I need to leave home. But I think you've talked about the kinds of trips, and there are those out there, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. But talk to me a little bit about going on mission without leaving home, because that may be a foreign concept. And again, you're in the place of you've got some potential young college medical students or whoever is there that's just their first time, just saying, okay, I'm just peeking in. I don't know what this looks like. Tell me about that. How does that even work?
Well, I think the Great Commission is basically, if you're not familiar with it, says, while you're going, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. So it doesn't say when you're overseas, anywhere you go, the command is not to go, the command is to make disciples. And so when you're going, wherever you live, you have the opportunity to do evangelism and to reach out. I like the idea of bloom where you're planted. Before we go somewhere else, we should be blooming where we're planted. And there are many people around us. Usually when we're reaching out to people like us, we call it evangelism. But mission is usually seen as something that's to a different ethnic group or cultural group or a different language group. And it requires often some special skills like learning a language or learning a little bit about what they believe so you can reach out to them. But we can, we have people all around us and we can reach out to internationals just as well as people like us. But sometimes people feel uncomfortable. They think, oh, they won't understand me or I'll make a mistake. But many internationals are extremely lonely in the US. Many are never in an American home the entire time they're here. So that's a really sad comment on our culture, especially for groups that come from very communal societies. So it's pretty simple. Wherever we are, missions isn't geographic, it's wherever we are. 24/7, 365.
What's funny, Sherry. Literally, years ago, I was a youth pastor at the time, and picked up a passion for missions. And I thought, I had these leadership students that I wanted to get plugged in, and I thought, man, I need to find some places. But I thought, well, how could I get them out of our context without some of them? They couldn't get out of the context, and so I started calling around. And literally, I'm ashamed about this, Sherry, but I didn't realize that our city, for example, like a lot of cities, had a refugee section of the city. And come to find out, not only that, but we're talking, at least in our city, we had hundreds of thousands of refugees. And it took a 20-minute drive for us to get to a part of the city that would make you feel like you're in another country.
Well, that's true in many cities. The refugees are usually settled in some of the poorer areas. The rents are lower. There's room available, which also isn't a great comment on our society, I think. But I grew up on a street where everybody on my street was Caucasian growing up. And now I have two Pakistani families. I have people from the Caribbean. We have mixed race couples. So America's changing, and the majority will be non-white by 2050, they say. So, sometimes you need to go to the inner city or something, but a lot of us, people are moving to our neighborhoods.
Yeah, and that's certainly been true where I am, and so walk me through that a little bit. So you've got somebody that's joining online, and they're like, okay, so maybe, and I love what you said, bloom where you're planted, and so they're thinking, okay, I'm a medical professional, but how do I do that? What does that look like other than working my job and being a neighbor? Where do those lines meet for you? Where do you see those lines meeting?
Well, being a neighbor, I think is primary. God, it says in Acts 17 that God determined the exact places we will live. And the reason was that people could come to know him. So we shouldn't take for granted who our neighbors are. And it's not that easy to meet people when they stay in their house all the time these days. But I find just walking around the neighborhood, if I see somebody outside, I try to talk to them and just establish a little bit of a relationship is the place to start.
Yeah.
At work, though, if you're in a medical school or any kind of university, there are usually a lot of international students there. Some of the staff may be refugees from other countries. I know at the medical school I mentor the group, a lot of the cleaning staff are refugees. So you may have them all around you all day as well as in your neighborhood.
And so I think that's probably the thing that has hit me more than anything. Especially, I spent a lot of time taking literally, anywhere from 40 to 100 students overseas to experience different things and all that. And then sometimes they'd get back and still, that was their experience, but they didn't know what to do here. And so what I'm hearing, and it's been true for me, and I think would be true for you, part of it is open your eyes and recognizing, this is and will always be a melting pot, and more so now than probably ever before. And so let's just say somebody opens their eyes and they're like, okay, I just want to open my eyes. Oh yeah, I do have a group. If I'm a student, I do have an entire group of people of internationals. Okay, there are some parts of the city, where I work or where I go, their eyes start opening. So now, now that I see it, what do I need to be prepared to do? Okay, I recognize they're internationals. I see it. Give me something tangible for them to say, okay, now what do I do? How do I approach? Where do I start? What does that look like?
Well, I think as in most things, the first place to start is prayer and asking God to guide you to the right person or organization, and look for other organizations. You don't need to just go do your own thing. There are groups like International Fellowship of Evangelical Students, International Crossroads, groups, especially on campuses, that are already reaching out to international students. There may be local churches that are active in missions that have programs with refugees. A friend of mine will give an example of that later, I think. And, look and see what's already out there. Americans were pretty well known for just starting on something new and going on our own, but a lot of groups have been doing this a long time. They can present you opportunities, do all the organization, and be easy to plug in, especially if you have limited time. Maybe they need somebody for an hour a week to help with teaching English or medical English even, or tutoring children whose parents don't speak English, or simple things like that.
Yeah, it's we see it. We've really started to engage this in our city. And what's funny is it wasn't until we approached, it wasn't until we stepped in, it wasn't until we we really had to start saying, okay, where is God already at work? I know that's a common phrase. Where is God already at work, and how do we join? And as we started joining, then the Lord really started opening our eyes and helping us understand some of where they are and what's going on. And so, what are some ways you've seen? So, like for example, for us, we've seen as we've stepped in, we just started recognizing, before they're ready to hear the gospel, there's just some little simple things that we can meet along the way. Some of them are actually really deep and complex, but here's some opportunities for us to move in. But what are some ways that we can bless internationals? Like make that practical. So I want to go find a place to serve, or I might have, but maybe I've just met them at a table and I've just met them and I've just gotten to know their story. I know that's what some of you. What's the blessing? What's give me a little bit of the track of what am I looking for? What am I trying to leave them or leave behind? Does that make sense?
Yes. I think starting in any relationship to reach out to people, the first thing is to establish a friendship and model the love and compassion of Christ. Other faith groups and most countries and healthcare in general is not a real loving, touchy-feely place a lot of times. So often I find that people first ask, why are you so different? But we need to be different. And that means we need to be in the Word and in prayer and be growing. But starting just loving them and spending time with them, being their friends. And as you talk with them, they'll naturally tell you, different things they're struggling with or their needs. And that's where you can step in. Maybe they want some help with English, or if they're studying with some topic, they don't know the vocabulary. Maybe they have children who need a little help with their studies. Sometimes they need practical things, refugees especially. need to set up a home. They need appliances and they need to get a bank account, a driver's license. And that's why it's good to be part of a group. No one person usually can do all that. But as you talk to them, you can connect them with those kind of groups or help them with that. And another thing I find really helpful, one group I was in for quite a long time, we would always talk about the holidays we have in America and help them understand what they were and why we celebrate. And a lot of them have Christian, not only Christmas and Easter, but a lot of them you can talk about how God's hand was, helping within our country and why we celebrate that. And why do we have Thanksgiving? And why do we celebrate independence? And then as you get to know them better, you can ask them if they might want to read the New Testament or read the Bible. It's translated into so many languages. My neighbors from Pakistan I've gotten to know, and they brought me some food at the end of Ramadan a couple of years ago, and that's normal for them to give gifts. And I had bought 2 Urdu New Testaments, so-called the Injil, and gave them that, and they received it gladly. I hope they've read it. I don't know, but I've prayed for them for years, so only the Lord knows.
Wow. Wow, yeah, that's so good. For us in our context, for example, we went down, and it depends on the type of refugee, right? But we were having some refugees. This has been, golly, probably 12, 15 years ago. And at the time they were coming in and they were being set up with apartments that had ovens and microwaves and light switches. And literally, we were having families live for 3 months in an apartment and not know what the oven was for. And in that, you would think that just makes sense, but they also didn't know, oh, that's a mailbox where I get mail that my help is dependent on. And some of it was just so simple. It was just so simple. And then sometimes it's helping with, a lot of the open doors for us are parents recognizing things in their kids, which most refugees have been through trauma. And so helping them get in contact with just the right kind of help and just knowing what's available. And what a gift. You're loaded. I love this. So
yeah, sometimes they don't even know how to use the toilet. I've heard of people, if they're used to squatting, using so-called squatty potties, they stand on the sides of the toilet and squat, or, they don't know how to use the shower. So it is often very simple things that wouldn't take you very long to show them.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can have fun doing it. We've had a lot of We've had a lot of laughter in those moments. So give us a couple examples. Do you have any examples of just some international students who came to faith, and just give a little bit of what that looks like? If you have a practical story, that'd be great.
Yes, I know a student who is originally from Iran. He came to the U.S. to study engineering. He came to faith while he was here and eventually married an American. And they both went as missionaries and lived in Turkey in an area in the east where Iranian pastors could come across and get training. So here's a guy from Iran, reached here, becomes a missionary, and is teaching his own pastors in his own country, how to share the gospel or more about the Bible. So many pastors in other countries don't get formal training. And then another friend of mine who is from Japan, he also came here to study, and Japan's also a very unreached country. And he came to faith, and he ended up also marrying an American. That's not always the case, but they both went to Turkey as missionaries for about 10 years. So they learned Turkish and ministered, and then God called them back to Tokyo, where they are now. And that's a very unreached city. And he's actually become a leader of a series of ministries there, as well as the team he's on. Wow. And it's just great to see how God can use, the little bit we do here, and when they go home, have a big impact.
Yeah, one of the things, and some of my friends that are really passionate have really helped me with this, is to really think, literally, the world is sending their best and their brightest to the United States.
Exactly.
And for them to go home not only now with really influence, position, leadership, for them to also then have faith, the opportunity is bigger than we understand. It's just bigger than we comprehend.
Yeah, and even if they don't go home, a significant portion don't go home, but they've come to faith, and they can reach out to the other people around them, often from their language group, where we might not be able to speak the language.
Wow, that's good. So I know we have a guest, good friend of yours, Miss Cynthia Hale, and so I think she's going to share just an example of how a healthcare professional has worked with a local church to just bless and reach out to refugees. Is that right? And so, would you like to
Yeah,
introduce? Would you mind introducing her? And
Cynthia is a pediatrician. She was a missionary in Nepal for almost 25 years. She and her husband are both physicians, and so she learned Nepali, and she was very active in our church when refugees came to our area. So I'll let you tell that story. Let her tell that.
Hi, thank you, Sherry, for inviting me to share something about how God brought us to work with refugees in Albany, New York. Yes, when I came back from Nepal, after many years, I missed the Nepali people a great deal. At first, I made friends with some international students who were here for higher studies. And then we heard that Bhutanese refugees were coming to the United States. They were Nepali ethnic people who lived in the country of Bhutan. They were mostly Hindu. Bhutan was Buddhist. And so they began to have some difficulties in the 1980s. And then in the 1990s, they began leaving Bhutan and went to Nepal, ended up in UNHCR refugee camps there. And after many years, 16, 18 years, as I recall, they were finally given opportunities to emigrate to and arrive in USA, Canada, Australia, and other countries. And so when we heard about this, we thought, well, we know these people because where we served at the end of our time in Nepal, we met some Bhutanese Christians. They were Nepali. They weren't Buddhist. They were Hindus that had become Christians in Bhutan and had come to Kathmandu. And we joined together to help start a church in that part of the city. So we thought, well, we'll be glad to meet these people. And we went to Baltimore to find out from World Relief how they were working with these refugees. Yes, and Lutheran World Mission there also. Anyway, when we came back, we visited the local office of the refugee resettlement under United States. And then I said, well, we know the language, we'll be glad to help. And then I talked to our missions director at our church and our pastor, and they were very keen on it. And so we started what we called the International Friendship Team. And we pulled together those people in our church, about 20 initially, who wanted to get involved in this in many of the ways that Sherry's already mentioned. And we had a training for them, do's and don'ts, what it's like to be a Hindu, Nepali person, what they believe. We started a prayer time, both at the meetings and a special group that prayed every week for what was going on. And eventually, I think about 100 people in our church participated in one way or another, including inviting a family to come and join them for Thanksgiving or for Christmas or some other holiday. And then, of course, some of the ways that have been mentioned, I can add to that, and that is that we accompanied them to doctors' doctor's appointments, to the refugee office, to the welfare office, to the school to talk with the administrators or the teachers, as well as giving the practical help in English, learning English. We cooperated with other churches that already had an English program, but nothing much else. And some of our gentlemen helped with driving lessons. The church school allowed us to use their bus. So we were bringing a lot of the refugees to come on Sunday to have a gathering, singing their Nepali Christian songs, hearing about what's in the scriptures, and then having announcements and practical teaching about safety and so forth. And then we discovered that the women knew how to knit. They could even do it without any directions, written directions. So we started a group of them that came every week together and learned a new pattern. And then they made many copies of that. And then we set up marketing opportunities and sold those for them. And then they could have a little extra pocket money. Unfortunately, those who were really smart got better jobs and they stopped making these items. And then in the end, most of them emigrated from Albany and went to places in the country, mostly in Ohio, but also Pennsylvania, where there were more of their family members who had been resettled in other places, and where there was a temple for Bhutanese or a church. We never were fortunate enough to have a Nepali Christian pastor, Bhutanese, who came to our city, who could start a church. We did the best we could with a fellowship group for them, both in their homes and both at our church. And some of them professed faith in Christ and were baptized at our church. But even now, we have about 5 Christian families still here in Albany, but most of them are remaining are not Christian, and the greatest majority left and went to Ohio. So I heard there's going to be a big conference again this year. They've had one every year, starting in Boston in 2008. And lots of Bhutanese Christians from around the country join. And there's thousands and thousands, and they are very active in evangelism themselves. So praise God for that. We used 2 verses in particular from the scriptures I do want to mention. One is from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 34, where God said, "The alien living with you must be treated as one of your native born. Love him as yourself, for you were aliens in Egypt. I am the Lord your God." And then the story of the Good Samaritan, and where Jesus asked, well, who was the neighbor to the man? And the answer was the one who had mercy on him. And so these people are our neighbors, and we have tried to show them mercy. Wow. God bless you all, as whatever God leads you to do.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So you're a gift. So a couple things. Number one, what's interesting, you mentioned Nepali. So when we actually went, this is just personal, but when I started taking students down, the first families we met were Nepali. And what was amazing was sometimes we were reaching in, trying to reach the adults, and had some, they were warm and welcoming, but what was interesting was their kids needed a home because their kids spoke English, but the parents still struggled. And so what we started doing was we just sucked their kids into everything we did. We loved them like crazy and loved them like they were our own. They were the best dancers of anybody you ever met. They loved to dance, and they are singers. And fast forward now, just as you said that, so literally a little trip and trying to discover, and then not sure what we could do. And then we start leaning in, and then we find and we connect some relationships, and we just kind of, like you said, just treat them like family. Just treat them like you would your own, like they're not strangers, but like they have a home. Fast forward, one of the young men is a Christian Nepali filmmaker who is making films, Christian films for Nepalis, and he's winning a bunch of awards all over the country. And I just,
Wow.
even as you said that, I thought, yeah, I don't think I've ever shared that before, but what a gift. It literally we hosted the very first premiere of his movie here at the church. And beforehand, you've never tasted better food in your life. It was great in Poly Food, and they're like, they just loved it. And then I think there was a dance party for about 20 minutes before the movie premiere. And it was just absolutely a blast. And which is kind of what happens. I think sometimes people say, "Oh, I guess I'll go do that hard thing," and they don't. I always think of Jesus for the joy set before him. What he walked through, he knew there was a joy on the other side of laying your life down. And what's interesting is even hearing you share, Cynthia, I can just sense the joy. I can just sense what you got to be a part of and what God did in you. And that is part of this, is you think you're going and laying your life down, it's going to be this terrible, but you don't understand the joy. You don't understand the joy that's on the other side. The other thing I heard was, I loved what you said, Cynthia, you said we couldn't find a pastor. And not that that's I'm not sure that that's up to the Lord. But what you said to a group of people was, you don't have to be a pastor to do what we did. You don't have to have a degree in ministry. You don't have to have some big you have to have open eyes. You have to have an open heart. I love that Leviticus passage. I don't think I've read it in that context, and I love that. But you have to have a heart for people, and you have to have a heart for Jesus. And when you open yourself up to that, I think you might be surprised with what God does with your life. And so for the two of you, if you don't mind, let me give you just a last. So you're talking to a potential. Let's back up the bus. And so if you could speak to the 22, I don't know how old you are out there. Maybe you're younger, you're older. If you could speak to the 22-year-old version of yourself, and you could just say, and you just want to encourage them to live a life wide open, just in a couple minutes, what would each one of you say? And Cynthia, I'll start with you, and then we'll move right back to Sherry, if that's all right. Cynthia, is that all right? Do you mind? What would you say, 22-year-old version of you? What would you say?
Well, I would certainly say commit your life totally to the Lord, surrender to him. Jesus said, if anybody will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily and follow me. What good will it be to gain your life and lose your soul, etc. And so that is the first step. And then God can use you here or in Nepal or in some other country. There are still lots and lots of people in the world that will never hear about Jesus because there is no Christian in their area. And they're not all coming to the USA, although many of them are. And so we still need to send people to those pockets because Jesus said, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world, and then the end will come. And we haven't finished this task. So that is my word to the 22-year-olds. But if God does keep us here before or after such a period of time, look around. There are many missionaries who've had to come back home for various reasons from countries like Afghanistan, for example. And there are lots of Afghan refugees around. And so they are given the opportunity to meet with them and lead them to faith. But one thing is that our materialistic culture is very infectious. And so as the refugees begin to get themselves well settled and get jobs, better jobs, start a business, whatever, they are sucked into this and they lose some of their initial spiritual curiosity and interest. So it's very important to try to work with them early. And what I meant by the pastor matter is that we never received a Bhutanese refugee who had been a pastor in the camps. who would lead the group. So we had to do our best. But our own pastor, American pastor, and our mission director were very highly supportive of what was happening. And anyway, so that's my answer.
I love it. It's a good one. That's a good one. All right, Sherry, what do you have?
Well, I certainly agree with everything Cynthia said. I think each of us needs to not only surrender, but see ourselves as on mission all the time. No matter what we do in our career, we can glorify God if we commit it to Him. And that's the same with our friendships, our activities. So we need to always be looking for opportunities God's putting in our way, whether it's sitting on an airplane or, at a party or a local festival or at school or at work. Also, don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone. People probably aren't going to just come to you to be your friends, but they're very lonely, so many internationals, and I find it much easier to meet and develop relationships with them than with Americans. And remember that many of them like to talk about spiritual things. With a Muslim, if you don't talk about spiritual things, they don't think you actually believe it. So you can ask them about their faith. You can ask, could you share your story? I don't know of any country where it's forbidden to answer questions or share your story with permission. So that's certainly true here, although, it's getting more difficult as our culture moves away from God. But look for opportunities and be prepared to share your story and include some scripture, because the word is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword. And just ask God to use you. I've been amazed. I was pathologically shy as a teenager, and I've been amazed what God has done, allowed me to be part of.
Wow. Wow. Well, I'll speak on behalf of them. I'll say what a lot of you out there are thinking. Thank you, both of you. One of the things my wife and I say all the time to young couples is we say, we want to know at 90 years old, however long the Lord leads us here, we want to sit maybe in a rocking chair on a porch and say, wow, we really got to pour our lives out. What a gift. And to see just the fruit of the kingdom, whether people know that we were part of it or not, just to see the fruit of the kingdom. And I think we see the fruit in your lives. And I just want to say to all of you, you have a real opportunity in front of you. You have an opportunity to leverage that one and only life that you have. You've just heard a couple stories from some saints, some women of faith who've just poured their lives out. And I think they would say to you, open up your eyes. Some of us, I say this to my family members and some of our young men and women around here. I'm like, you cannot be that smart and know more, books and quotes. Like, the amount of information in your brain is amazing, and what you've learned is amazing. It doesn't take that much digging to figure out where God can use you. So apply that brain to the kingdom mission that He's called you to, and watch what happens. So I hope that you're blessed by this. As always, good to spend time. Again, ladies, thank you so much. Blessing and God bless. Good to spend time with you.